Have you done a podcast before?
I have not.
We're going to be popping Scott's cherry today.
Yes, this is it.
We love that. That fits right in with our theme. We're introducing the world to the most interesting entrepreneurs that you've never heard of. Here we go. So Scott Brown's going to rock it for us. Welcome to Find Your Freedom, the best entrepreneurs podcast. Our guest today is Scott Brown. Scott is a hotel developer and investor with nearly 2 decades in the space. Scott has raised enormous amounts of capital via both debt and equity while building a company that has over $1 billion in completed projects. In addition to raising capital and architecting the deals to develop these luxury assets, he and his team also handle entitlements, financial planning and modeling, design, development, construction management, and asset management. His work has taken him around the world from Orange County to New Zealand. He is also a husband and proud father of 3. Thank you for listening. We value your time, and our goal is to provide you the best entertainment possible. If you enjoy this podcast, the best way to support Doug and I is to take a second right now to like, subscribe, follow, and rate us. Also, share your favorite episode of the Find Your Freedom podcast with an entrepreneur in your life. They may need to hear what's in it. Being an entrepreneur is hard. Yo, 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 yo. Welcome, Scott. Super stoked to have you on with us today.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Nice to see you.
Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. Would like to see if we could start with what you currently do in your own words.
Currently, I'm a real estate developer. Our focus is hospitality, hotel development, and we've started to diversify into multifamily. So we're basically real estate developers in the hotel and multifamily space.
Beautiful. Now, I know going way back, you started in finance and then were able to cross over into hospitality and the real estate investment space. What was that transition like? What were your thoughts at the time, and what was the plan back then, if you can remember back to those days?
Yeah, I come from an entrepreneurial family, and no one in my family really ever had a real job per se, in the sense that my dad started his business and the kids worked in the business as well growing up. And when I transitioned from my job, I was actually working at Merrill Lynch, and I was 5 or 6 years into the business. I had reached a lot of my goals and started to realize that there was a point at which I knew I was going to end up going out and building my own business. And I was actually introduced to a project in Las Vegas. Someone asked me to help them raise some money for a development project. And I'd always had an interest in real estate. I thought it was more residential. And I flew out to Las Vegas to talk about this deal that this person had put together. And it was a family friend and someone who was he was an architect, so he knew what he was doing. He wasn't just someone thinking about something and looking for my advice. It was I've got this project I've created and I need to help. I need to raise $5 million, and you're in that space. Can you come look at this? And so I brought someone.
So he reached out to you because you're an investment banker at the time.
Right.
Is that okay?
Right? And knew I had access to. Thought I had access to capital for investment like that.
Yeah.
And so I brought one of my a person who worked on my team, much smarter than I was. He had left our team and went into the real estate development space. And so Eric flew out to Las Vegas and met me there. We met with Larry, and we were going through the project, and Larry had it all mapped out on a piece of paper, and Eric, looked at me. He's like, well, if we could turn this $5 million project into a $50 million project, we can raise the money for you, which I thought was super interesting.
We just need a 10 exit. That's all.
Exactly. Well, that's where the capital is, right?
Right.
No one
Right.
wants to spend, write a $5 million check. And so we went back, put together a business plan. It just so happened that the property that Larry was looking at could be much larger if we wanted to take it down. And so, to make a long story short, we got involved right away. I actually put the deposit down on the land, and we went from 5 acres to 20 acres and turned a $5 million project into a $50 million project. Actually, I think it was a little more than that. And we shopped the deal. I was obviously riding on Eric's coattails. I hadn't done this before. And we got term sheets, and we got solid term sheets. And we raised the money. And so the deal didn't happen because one of our partners with some of the seed money decided to back out, and it left us in a position it was too much risk at that point. We would have had to put too much of our own money in. And so we walked away from the deal, but we had the institutional capital. And that's when I realized if I didn't even know what I was doing and we raised $50 million, I was in the wrong business at Merrill Lynch. And that's when I started to think about what commercial real estate space has scale. I'm not interested in the medical office space. And so it took me a few years to actually figure out that it was hotels. And I can tell you how we started our company if that's what part of the question is. But that's when I started to realize that my next business was going to be commercial real estate, and I just needed to figure out what space I was going to get into.
So losing that deal was like the best thing that ever happened.
Well, it was, because the market just completely shit the bed, and but it shit the bed for me as well when I was doing hotels. But yeah, it was a good thing that we lost it, because it got me into the hotel business.
This literally is what we had just talked about. We interviewed on our last sort of mini episode an aspiring entrepreneur, and we were talking about how some of the biggest lessons that the entrepreneurs that we have as guests come on, some of the biggest lessons are from failures, and how you can't really look at those as failures. Those are really like the huge lessons that you build up, and that's how you get your master's degree to end up becoming successful. So you put all this work in, getting the money, putting the deal together, doing all these things. It doesn't work out. That's a big failure, right? But then it actually was your foundation for building what ended up being this, now, over $1 billion worth of deals that you've done, which is just incredible. I love that.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, I've had a couple of those lessons.
So you raised the 50 million, and then it was like, okay, it's still, that capital was still ready to go for a deal and be deployed. So now you just went from canceling that one to going and finding another home for that 50 million, or was it a couple years later before you were back in a position to pull the trigger on something?
Yeah, so I knew the capital was there in the general sense, with the institutional, capital being available, not that block of money. But I knew I could go back to the same investor groups. And so it took me, a few, I don't recall exactly how long, but I was at Merrill for 10 years. And so somewhere between like 6 and 7 and 10, when I left, this business got created. And so Eric and another buddy of mine, who I went to high school with, had been talking about, starting a real estate development business. And we had been talking about it for so long. And I finally said, look, guys, it's time to make something happen or not. And so we planned a weekend in Las Vegas, of all places. Yes. But it just so happened one guy was in Tahoe, one guy was in San Diego, I was in San Francisco. So we were all like, okay, we'll meet in Vegas.
Perfect. Vegas always makes sense. Vegas always makes sense.
You can always talk yourself into that one.
Oh yeah. Before you go to Vegas, it always makes sense. On the way home, it didn't make sense. And so we all met in Las Vegas, and really the premise was to walk away with a business plan. And so, or an idea that was going to be turned into a business plan. And so my buddy Jesse's family was in the select service roadside motel business for his whole life. So he understood operations for hotels, and he was also a construction guy. So He knew that space. Eric was finance, and I was just a guy with like a lot of like, I was excited about building a business. I was the entrepreneur, right? So we decided in Las Vegas that we were going to be hotel developers, and we walked away. And ABA is our initial for our last names, Altshuler Brown Allison, and so that's how we got ABA Development, which I thought was a really dumb idea, but the other guys liked it, and so we went with it. Got business cards printed. I went back to my firm, and negotiated. I had actually been recruited to UBS the last year of my business, and I was recruited to UBS to build out a platform that Merrill had already built out and was 5 years ahead of UBS. And so I got recruited to build that out in San Francisco, and UBS just wasn't prepared. They didn't have the platform for it. And so they had promised me, basically all the tools I needed. And when I got there, it didn't exist. And so we had a contentious relationship. And when I decided that I was ready to start building the real estate development business, it just happened to be at the same time. I was about a year into UBS, and we were heading down a path that wasn't productive. And I basically went to my district director and said, look, let me walk away, and I won't sue you and you don't sue me.
I like that.
Fair.
Get a clean break.
Let's get a mutual termination.
That sounds fair.
Well,
ways as
I
friends.
knew that I was about to start a business, and he didn't. So
Right.
I knew that I had, ulterior motives, and he thought, well, this kid just needs to continue on with his career. And we kind of, threw a monkey wrench in it. And so we came to an agreement, had a settlement, and I walked out of UBS. I remember I was wearing my suit, my favorite suit, and I walked up California Street, went home, and converted my garage into an office. And that's how ABA development started. And we knew the space we were going to be in, and which was really important for us, because if you know where you want to be, then you can build everything around that. If you don't know exactly where you want to be, then you kind of, go in a lot of different directions. But we knew we wanted to be in the select service hotel space. Hyatt, all the major brands had just introduced a brand new brand in that space that was competing with Courtyard and Residence Inn. And it was totally financeable. And so we picked Hyatt Place because Hyatt was one of the better brands at the time, or the better names. And they had purchased Hyatt Place. They had purchased AmeriSuites and converted like 150 of them to Hyatt Place. So now there was a market for it, right? So it wasn't like we were going to go and create something that didn't exist. It was Hyatt. They built 100 or bought 100, and I think it was 39 AmeriSuites, converted them. And so we just piggybacked on that. And so our pitch to the institutional capital was, everywhere there's a Courtyard in America, we're going to build a Hyatt Place on the other corner. And it was like, okay, we know what the Courtyard is. There's like 800 of them. There's only 130 Hyatt Places, so there's a huge market there. And it resonated. And so, it sounds simple right now, and it was, a total flyer at the time. But that's kind of what we sort of, that was our business thinking and model and strategy, and it hit. And we were looking for,
I love that.
We were looking for like $12 million of equity. And we got a couple term sheets, and the first real one said, we'll give you $100 million, and you got to spend $100 every 2 years. And we're like,
so another 10X deal.
But they were like, this is big, but we want it to be huge.
Right.
And so that's how I got started.
Yeah, it sounds like a great idea. And I love how you said, when you did we call it the Entrepreneur Retreat weekend in Vegas, you talked about what each person was bringing to the table. And I think that's so useful for everyone to hear. This person was bringing the real estate talent. You were bringing the entrepreneur skill set along with a little bit of financing, and someone was bringing the money. Everyone had already built up their expertise. And I think that's what a lot of people miss in these entrepreneur startups is that you have to become an expert in your lane, and then you can bring that skill set along together with other people who fill the other gaps that you need for your business plan. And it sounds like you guys all just perfectly met together in the lane, and then you found the perfect niche of an opportunity that was just sort of rising up with this new limited service hotels, that sort of you were able to just say, look, we already see this huge opportunity. There's 900 of the competitor and we only have 100. So we got to build 700 hotels. Let's go.
Scott, I love the part in the story where you negotiated your freedom with UBS. That was really cool. I mean, they kind of, when you get into these larger firms, they have you in that 9-year deal, that 10-year deal, and
That's
you
right.
sign your life away. And I think most people just kind of resign themselves to, I got to fulfill this contract and I'm going to be here for the next decade. And you said, no, this isn't working for me. This isn't going to get me to where I want to be. And so you found a way to negotiate your freedom. Now, going back to your time at Merrill, interested to hear the skills that you acquired and built during your time at Merrill that helped lead you into a place where you could really bring a lot to that partnership that you created at ABA.
Gosh, I have a few experiences that sort of build, even before Merrill, I was involved in a business for 4 years in Australia and New Zealand. And so I had a lot of confidence going into Merrill Lynch, and then going to Merrill and actually putting a suit on and, evolving from a junior guy into a more senior guy, and building on the confidence, to building the business, being successful there, gave me a ton of confidence. And I think I realized that there was a way to mesh sort of a startup business and an investment banking. I was able to pull them both together. My dad was an entrepreneur forever, and he started his first business, with nothing, and he always, bootstrapped it or had money, raised money from either friends and family or small groups, no institutional experience whatsoever. And so when I got that experience at Merrill Lynch and I started dealing with big dollars, hundreds of millions and billions, when I got out of Merrill and started this business, I wasn't afraid of $100 million. I wasn't afraid of hundreds of, you know what I mean? Like that concept to an entrepreneur is like, it's so big, you're like, that's scary. And those people must know something that I don't know, but really it's just a bigger dollar. That's all.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what Merrill Lynch gave me was the exposure to the big dollars and to not be afraid of them. Because my dad was like, all of his businesses were a couple $1 million startup here and there. And then I was talking like big bucks. And he was like, that's amazing. Like, wow, that's so cool. And so, I think that's where what Merrill really gave me.
So you talked about how you came in as kind of junior, already had some confidence coming in at Merrill, started at a junior level and kind of worked your way up into the senior level. What do you think sets you apart at Merrill from the people that, were just doing okay and kind of here, and then you moved from the junior guy into the senior shoes? What skills and I guess abilities do you feel like you possess that enabled you to do that?
Well, great question. I didn't go to college. And so when I was 18, my dad bought a business. My parents separated that year, and my dad went on a vacation to sort of, heal his heart. I don't know. He was sitting on the beach in Sydney and decided that he wanted to stay in Australia. And so he bought the Columbia Sportswear franchise for Australia and New Zealand, which didn't exist. And so he happened to be in the retail business, and through his contacts, he this whole thing. And so once he secured the franchise, he started sending me, brochures, said, come on over and do this. And so, I ended up skipping I was just graduating from high school, and I went there for 4 years. And so, that was that was my college experience. And then I came back and, without a college degree, my best friend, she went to an Ivy League school. And so she got out of Ivy League. She graduated when I came back, both 4 years, and she got a job at Merrill. And she said, this would be perfect for you. And I always wanted to wear a suit, and I always wanted to work in the financial district. So she set me up with an interview, and Merrill the guys, no, it was a hard no. I just wasn't what they were looking for, and without a college degree, and I was 23, and they were like, politely a no. And then a broker called me a couple weeks or a month later. He had pulled my resume out of the resumes that were in the office and said, "Hey, do you want to come work as an intern?" And so I don't think he put two and two together, or, he's like, "Look, these are all the rejects. I can get an intern, no problem." And so I took the internship, which he said he was going to pay me $6 an hour. And of course he paid me for 2 weeks. And he was so broke because he was a junior guy too. And he was trying to build his business. He's like, "I can't pay you anymore." So, but I loved the business, and I think what really separated me from the pack was that everyone said you won't make it, and so that just made me work harder because I wasn't going to fail. With those expectations that I was going to fail, there's no way I was going to fail, and so I worked harder. I finally got an interview with the district director after 3 months, and I had produced all of my notes of everything that I had done as an intern. And he said, "Where'd you go to college?" After he hired me, and I said, "Well,
New Zealand."
So I told him that I didn't go to college, and he said, "I'm not going to stop you. This is up to you at this point. You've gotten this far, and most people don't make it. We have a 90% fail rate, so good luck." And I told him, I said, "If I meet my 12-month goals in 4 months, will you give me a raise, $1,000 a month?" And he said, "Absolutely. Again, good luck." So of course I met my 4-month goals, or my 12-month goals, in 4 months, went into his office. He gave me the raise. And that's when I realized I was actually able to, kind of compete in that space. And I just thought if I was going to be in the firm, I didn't want to be average. And so there was a huge producer who happened to have been recruited into our firm, our office, from Kidder Peabody. And he was the biggest producer in the firm at Kidder, came over to Merrill. And I was like, "That's my guy. I want to be him." He had a huge office, beautiful art all around the office. And he was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal when he got recruited. But he happened to be in my office. And so I pegged him as my target, and that's really what separated me from everyone else. Because I was at that point, there was no one in the office that was important to me, and I just did everything I could to be associated with that guy.
I love that. That's so awesome. So what is it that you did that was able to partner up with him or learn from him? I think that this is something that a lot of people miss out on, is saying "Hey, here's this mentor that I have in front of me. I'm going to gain as much as I can from him." What did you do to be able to align yourself where it was somewhat mutually beneficial, I presume?
Yes. I figured out what kind of accounts he covered, and I went after those accounts. That was it. Exactly what I did. I was David Moyne. When I picked up that phone and when I was going after accounts, I all of a sudden stopped going after, $100,000, $1 million accounts, and I went after $100 million accounts. And that's just how if he can do it, I can do it. You know what I mean? It's like, If you put two people side by side, what's really the difference? You wouldn't know unless someone told you what the difference in those two people is. And so I always looked at it like, it'll take me a little while. I've got to learn the business, but I can take everything to David, and he'll if I have $100 million account, I'm not going to do it myself. I'm going to take it to that partnership and say, okay, well, let's partner on this. And I'll take, a small cut of it. I don't care. Just partner with me.
Just build the book.
Just let's build a book together.
Yeah.
At first, he had no interest in that at all, like zero. But it took a while. I finally got into in the door.
Yeah, that struggle is something that we really like to highlight on this podcast. So what was going through your head in those early discussions while you were, was it mostly just calling people and giving your pitch? Were you going office to office for these huge accounts? What was going through your head, and what gave you the inspiration to, keep going? Because it sounds like it wasn't an immediate success.
Well, I wanted to be something that I wasn't at the time. And so I was super hungry. And so that's what kept me going. And, I happened to be in a pretty good place in San Francisco when I started Merrill in 93 or 4. The tech boom had started a couple years later. And so every week, multiple accounts were going public, and names that you wouldn't know and would maybe have been, a year in business, but every C-suite executive was 50 million to $1 billion net worth, like on the day of the IPO. And so that was my target right there. And so I figured out a pitch that was, the hardest part was getting to them. Once I got to them, then the easy part was just talking them through a meeting with our team. And so that was my sole focus, was every IPO I was covering or calling on the CEO and the top 3 guys. And it was exhilarating. I mean, when in the beginning, it's like, oh, I'm sitting down with a guy who's worth $100 million. I mean, that's like awesome, when you're in your early 20s. And then I started closing accounts. And then, my goal, I started meeting goals. And as you meet your goals, when you're 20, it's like, I want to be able to pay my rent and still have some money left over.
Right.
Yeah. I want to be able to pay my rent and buy a car and still have some money left over. And then I want to be able to pay my rent, buy a car, and travel. And then all of a sudden, when you can do all this stuff, your goals start to change again. And mine changed in the sense that I wanted to go start my own business.
Yeah, it sounds like you really had that mentality of kind of shoot for the stars. And, even if you don't land on the farthest star, you're still going to land on the moon or somewhere really cool. Like, you were just like, I'm going to go for the big fish. If I end up with not the biggest fish, it's still a really big fish. And that led you into sort of a really sweet spot of that high end. And then once again, it was paired with your preparation and your mentality, paired with a really good sort of a luck situation where the tech boom happened and you were already there. So once again, that's kind of like another theme that we hear a lot. You're working hard, you're grinding, you're in the right sweet spot, and then sort of there's an opportunity that comes and you're ready for it and you pounce straight on it. That's beautiful.
You got to pounce on it.
If you're enjoying this podcast, we really appreciate you listening. Please take a second to like, subscribe, and follow, and share your favorite episode of Find Your Freedom with an aspiring entrepreneur in your life. Now back to the show. Let's transition now back to you building out the hotel development company. Can you talk a little bit about the early years in that company when you guys, I think you said you were in a garage grinding it out. Sort of, can you talk us through some of the struggles? Do you have any specific story of, man, this was really rough in the beginning, or did it really take off immediately there?
That's a great question. And I got lucky. So I've had ups and downs. So I view my life and my career as a lucky one. But I've also had the pitfalls. So that my mind doesn't really focus on that as much. But in the beginning, I negotiated my exit from UBS, built the office, started the ABA development, and I had enough capital, which is a kind of a lucky place to be, right? So a lot of people, have to try and figure out how to get that first seed, and I was able to seed my business, and so I wasn't struggling for a paycheck the first couple of years. So I'll consider that as a lucky piece, and so the first couple of years, I didn't really have the struggles, we did run out of money. See, this is one of the things I forget. I had to borrow some money the last couple months, and the guy is still friends of mine, and it was like 40 grand. And so I did run out of money. That was a struggle, but we overcame that, and we got the big check, and all of this happened all at once in the end when I ran out of money, just dumb luck. So I never went without food or rent.
Isn't it crazy with all the hundreds and millions and billions that 40K at one point was almost broke your back?
Yeah. Yeah, it literally was. And so the early struggles, I don't remember, because it was all fun and games at the time. We were building a business and I wasn't working for a big firm anymore. And so that was great. When I got the first round of funding and we had a big pipeline of deals, the market crashed. So when you say early, I founded the company middle of 2005, got funded in 2007, ramped up really quickly, and then 2008 September, we just got annihilated.
Right.
So all the great stuff came crashing down, but I again didn't realize it. I was too ignorant to realize that I was legitimately like so deep in the hole financially. But it's paper, right? You wake up, you don't know it, but your investors know it. And so they're like, that's a real dollar amount.
Right.
You're on the hook for that. And so
you're 3 years in, and then the Great Recession hits.
Yeah, and I'm $20-30 million in the hole like overnight. But I don't know it. I mean, I see it, but I'm like, that doesn't feel any different, So yeah, no, we had that was a very big challenge.
Did you keep building through that? Did you guys pause building to sort of, how do you handle that? I mean, there's a lot of people out there that are dealing with, potentially a looming recession here. Can you talk us through a little bit? All of a sudden the great financial crisis, you already have funds. Do you pause your projects? Do you continue your projects? Do you, how do you handle that situation?
We continued. We built one project. We were far enough along. I was able to go to my partners and convince them that walking away from that deal was not a good idea. And so we paid cash. We didn't get a construction loan, which was very, very unique. Most capital would never do that. We just happened to have great, it was a huge hedge fund and they were very, very good partners. And so we built that hotel down in Carlsbad with cash. And it turned out we made money when we sold it. But we put a lot of our deals on hold. And that was where I went through a huge transition because the capital markets were not investing in hotels. They were all disposing of their portfolios. And it took me a couple of years to fortunately we had enough projects that I was busy, but once those projects sort of came, were built, open, we weren't investing more money. I had to switch gears. And one of my GCs, we became friends and we decided to partner. And so the next several years of my business was finding fee business, either in the general construction hotel or developer as a fee. And so we built probably 20 hotels for private equity, a private equity fund through that period. But we acted as a fee GC, fee developer, and I had no ownership in those. And that was a big pivot for us. Otherwise, I would have been going back to work.
So the equity deals are on hold, you're saying, and then during that time period where a lot of that is paused and on hold, you're doing the construction deals to keep the lights on.
Yeah. Okay. And the development. Yeah. As a fee developer. We had to.
Did you view that just as really sort of expanding your runway? Like, hey, let's find somewhere to gap until the economy improves, until things get better. And then we're going to go back to doing our equity deals, taking on our own deals. Did you really view that as a bridge? or you're like, okay, this is another opportunity that we can just make good money on? What was your thought process then?
Both. It was a bridge. And now I look back and say it was a good bridge because I know something, I know a completely different business that I never knew before. So now I understand construction, even with our business now. And so it's a lot easier for me to underwrite deals and really understand the mechanics of on the construction side. Because if you don't know that, it's totally foreign and it can really come back and haunt you. So no, I see it as a net positive, but it's not how I wanted my business to run, when I started it.
What was your favorite deal that you've done to this point now? It sounds like it's been, you have $1 billion worth of deals that you've ran through now. What was your favorite project and why?
Snowmass Club. We bought this. I went to Aspen on a weekend trip with my wife. We actually went to Vail and we were driving back to Denver, and I just was like, we were so close to Aspen, and I was, when I was little, I lived in Aspen. So I spent my early years there, and I took my wife. I said, I really think while we're here, we should just spend a couple days in Aspen. And she was like, okay, let's do it. So we had our 3-year-old and our 1-year-old, and we turned around and we went to Aspen. It was September. And we were in the park, and she was like, wow, could we live here like for a year? It's truly. And I was like, of course, absolutely. Yeah. That's music to my ears. And
Sweet.
So
was that your plan all along, Scott? I'm going to show her Aspen. Gotcha. Get her excited.
Well, she was talking about a year overseas, and I was just thinking about the commute. And so I was like, if I can get her somewhere where I don't have to jump on a plane for 12 hours to do my job. And so
Smart.
I don't know I think it was subconscious. And so we went to Aspen. She fell in love with it. And we literally, I found a place. We found a place. She went home, and that place didn't work out. I found another house, and literally like 2 or 3 weeks later, we moved into a beautiful home in Snowmass, and it was purely family time for a year. That was our intention. And a few months into it, I was getting bored, obviously. And
got the itch.
Totally got the itch. And my wife, my son came home with like a little fake gold medal from a little ski thing, and he was 3.5. And so my wife started crying, and she's like, "Oh my God, we're never going to get this anywhere. We have to stay in Aspen." And like the next day, I was in town, like prospecting. Like, where can I get a deal? Where can I find a deal? I met a guy who was a broker who said he had these 4 off-market deals, and come into his office the next day. I went into his office the next day, pitched all 4 of these deals. One of them was the Snowmass Club, which was not on the market, but it was for sale. Toll Brothers owned it. And I started doing due diligence, and I made an offer to Toll Brothers like a month or 2 later. And that's when I was like, okay, it's game on. So,
what's the scale? What's the scale on this deal?
What was the size?
Yeah.
Well, the acquisition, I think we closed at $18.5 million for the purchase, but then we had another $80 million of potential real estate development. We were going to build a lot more condos. And that was really the big play there. It wasn't the golf or the resort. It was the development of new condos. And so that was probably the most fun, working and living in a resort town. And it was 200 acres. You looked up the valleys, the mountain. It was just spectacular. And the kids came every day. And so, that was a really fun experience.
That's beautiful. And I think it's valuable. It's valuable the way you talked about the way you went to go get this deal. You're like, I get the itch. A lot of people are like, I don't know where to start. And you're like, I'm going to go start talking to brokers, real estate agent. Let's go see what these people have. Like, people who live there and have been there a while, they know what deals are off market. They know what people have been talking about. This person said he was thinking about selling. This person, has this property. And a lot of people don't don't realize they can just go start talking to people and building relationships, and the opportunities arise just from putting yourself out there on those things. So I think that was really important that you point those things out. It's like, look, I want to get working here. I'm going to go meet some people and see what opportunities are there, and look at this beautiful project. Of all the projects you've done, that ended up being, the most enjoyable one for you. And good on you for having such awesome quality family time. I think that's so valuable also.
Yeah, that was a really cool story, Scott. Thank you for sharing that one with us. Now, you've been in the development real estate space for many, many years now, almost a couple decades here. And I'm sure the industry has changed quite a bit during your time in it, operating in it. For those folks listening who are interested in getting to one day where Scott Brown is and be doing all this cool and amazing work that you do now, what would you say to those folks? How has the industry changed over these 15 to 20 years that you've been in it, and what would you say to folks that want to enter it now?
I think when I started, and I don't know, when I started the business, I feel like there was a huge transition taking place at that time, which was all of the brands were starting to open up and expand their offerings. So before 2006, Hyatt had its small pocket of, flat, like five, Regency, Grand, a couple, Park Hyatt, Marriott had its group, its cluster, Intercontinental had its cluster, Starwood had its cluster. And then once this whole new select service, limited service expansion happened, I think it opened up the door for a lot of people like me to come in and get involved in a business that it was evolving into something a little more attractive for a new developer. And then in the last 15 years, now if you go to Hyatt, they've got like 30 brands. So if you want to be in the boutique, hotels, they've got 5 boutique brands. So you can partner with them and be in that space. If you want to be in small hotels of the world, which is even its own segment. If you want to be, there's now all of a sudden, it's not just the traditional hotel. It's really morphed into a much more creative and enticing business as far as I'm concerned. If you wanted to be a boutique hotel 15 years ago, you were on your own. You were building it, you were branding it, and you were going to figure out a way to, get reservations. Now you can just plug into any of the major brands.
So the opportunities now are much more than they were when you jumped into it.
I think a lot. Yeah. Absolutely.
Cool.
One of the questions we like to ask every guest that we have on here is, how would you define entrepreneurship? It's a very kind of personal question, so feel free to answer it any way that it resonates with you.
I think entrepreneurship for me is building a business where you don't really have a boss. You find your passion and build a business around your passion.
I love that.
It's kind of simple.
Yeah. Self-starter, discipline, making it happen on your own. No one telling you what to do.
Yeah. And it's not simple. Don't get me wrong. I thought about this my whole life, until I started a business. So it's daunting and it's very stressful to say, what am I going to be someday? But when you finally figure it out, that's when it becomes easy, because you're like, oh, I love this. This is what I'm going to do. But until you figure out what you love, it's like, my parents were in the clothing business, so I always thought I was going to own a clothing company. And so I was always thinking about clothing. What am I going to copy Oakley? Am I going to be a ski company? Am I going to be a surf? Because I love skiing, love surf, and I love the beach. But that's just not the business that I got into. So I think, entrepreneurship to me means once you figure it out, just not having a boss.
I dig that. So it sounds like you've been successful both professionally and investment wise. What's the best investment advice that you would have for our audience?
You got to invest in yourself. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. As far as, investment advice, buy low, sell high, that's, obvious.
I dig that. So you've put most of your investments back into your projects. You do equity deals, and you really kind of have put your money in your mouth, in your own, where your mouth is, and driven 100%, yourself.
100%, without question. If anyone ever comes to me and says, "Hey, will you invest in this?" I have to invest in myself first, and I'm not in a place where we're prepared to stop investing in ourselves. And so, a lot of times people say, well, you don't live in a $10 million house. Like, well, I got a lot of $10 million projects that I own,
I love that.
And that's where I am with, my investment strategy now is just to keep investing in ourselves, in our business.
That's a pretty common thing with a few of the real estate guests that we've had on is say, I'm putting my own money into this deal also, and it helps your other partners trust you. All the other LPs. It's like, look, I have my money in this deal, and it really gives you a sort of a competitive advantage in a lot of places where it's just like, I'm in here with you. Like, let's do this together. We're going to have this successful project. So I love that you did that.
Absolutely.
This is the cool part of the podcast where we have so many different peoples at different levels, and we haven't been able to talk to someone who's gone through the development side of entrepreneurship before. So I think this is really useful for our audience. I really appreciate you sharing all those stories with us.
Of course. Thank you.
Is there any resources that have helped you get to this level that you thought that you think would be able to share with our guests? Is there books that you read, podcasts you listened to, or other sort of mentors that have helped you along the way that would be good for our audience to hear?
That's a really good question, and I love to read. So, but I don't typically enjoy business books. So I can't tell you that there's been one book that has changed my life, but I usually focus on my industry, and then I'll buy books in my space and I'll skim through those books, and I'll use some of them as guides, the ones that have, information that I don't know. So I pick, hotels, and now we're in multifamily. And so I'll go into the, Amazon, multifamily, find books that I in that are educational. But as far as, authors or, I've read a lot of, GM and, Southwest Airlines and Disney, and they all tell a common theme, have passion and follow your, dreams and goals and work hard. And,
I love that. Use some case studies. I love that you referenced, just, look at some successful things, use them as case studies to apply to yourself. That's great.
Yeah. And find people in the business you want to be in that are successful. If I wanted to be the shoe guy, I'd go read, the Nike book and, the Reebok book and the Adidas book. So no, I think just, when you know what space you want to be in, there's a ton of resources out there.
Absolutely. And yeah, Scott, before we wrap and let you get out of here, I'm curious to know your thoughts on risk and how you approach risk. And where I'm coming from with the question is, my company, we're all about doing small deals. We do high volume, low price point. So our risk is spread out across hundreds of assets. And so if we miss on a couple, we have a whiff over here, or we didn't underwrite that one well, or, any unforeseen things happen, we can afford to have a couple misses, right? And I feel like with your business, with how much is at stake on each individual deal, the size of these deals, it feels like you have to have a near perfect batting average. So what are your thoughts on risk, and how do you approach it?
It's a great question, and this has been a learning lesson. It took me a while. Our risk isn't as much in the size of the deal, it's the diversification. And when 2008 happened, hospitality is the most risky commercial real estate asset. We got blown up. Fortunately, I had great partners with deep pockets. So we made it out of, that correction. But then COVID crushed us again. And so hospitality just got annihilated. And I, through COVID, realized that we needed to diversify our portfolio and our risk. And so we brought a multifamily component into our sort of pipeline. And all of a sudden, like, I can make a phone call on a multifamily project and everyone listens. I can make a call on a hotel project and a couple people will listen, right? Because it's so risky and it's so volatile. And although they like the space, they don't want to invest in it. And so we diversified. And I think the next 10 years for me are going to be, much different than the last 15 years, 20 years, just because I'm not solely focused on hospitality, which, when I was in Merrill, what was the number one thing they taught you? Diversify.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
It always comes full circle. It always comes full circle.
Here I am 20 years later. So now I'm not going to put all my eggs in one basket.
This is a great place to end it on, because it really brings us full circle on your finance start, or I should say your entrepreneurial starts with your dad, sort of giving you kind of that initial taste of what it's like to be your own boss. And then going into finance, getting some corporate, really swimming with some big fishes, which you're able to utilize in your real estate deals that you start with hotels. And now you're diversifying into the multifamily for your next 10 years. I love how you gave us that little sneak peek of sort of the next stage of everything. This is a really cool full circle story of how you can just say, look, I'm going to do it. I have confidence in myself. I'm looking around. There's some big players here. I'm just as good as they are. I can do it too. So I really appreciate you sharing that story. It's very inspiring.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Scott, this was awesome, man. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Jonathan. Nice to see you guys.